Look, this whole chapter and part of chapter 9 all emphasize solving these quadratic equations, finding the zeros. That's what we're looking for, to find the zeros. We're looking for where this parabola crosses the x-axis. Okay? Didn't we do it by factoring? And we looked at our table. That was one way. And then, if you recall, in chapter 9, we did a lot of factoring. And the reason we factored is to find the zeros. Okay, those were the two places where it crossed the x-axis. And then we had something like, well, what if x squared is equal to, I don't know, 17? We could take the square root of both sides, right? And x would equal plus or minus the square root of 17, which is about plus or minus 4.1, something like that. Okay? So we had problems like that. And then the last couple days we've done completing the square. These are all ways, factoring, graphing, looking at a table, factor by taking the square root of both sides. These are all ways that we can find where it crosses the x-axis. Yeah?
For the, what you did, you just got the approximately 4.1.
Right. Whatever the square root of 17 is.
Shouldn't you have two answers?
Plus or minus.
Oh.
That's your two answers.
Oh, okay.
One's plus, one's minus, yeah. So, and then there's this final way that we can find where it crosses the x-axis. And we have a formula. And it is called the quadratic formula. All right? Now, Zach, can you tell me what the general form of an equation is for a quadratic? Y equals f of x equals, what's a general form? Yeah, what is it? Speak up, so we can hear you. X squared
plus bx equals c. No.
Plus c.
Plus equals.
Okay. If you want to find zeros, you put in a 0 for f of x or a 0 in for y. It's important, and I told you this before when we did the completing the square, it's important to know what's your A, what's your B, and what's your C. Okay? So we have a formula that looks like this. In order to solve for x, it equals the opposite of b, not negative b, the opposite of b, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay?
That's kind of
Yes.
So you said the last one, the general form is A and squared plus B and C. This is the form is.
This is quadratic. This is a form of a quadratic where if you graph a quadratic, you're going to get a parabola. And what we're looking for are the zeros. And you're going to find that using this formula, it's going to be pretty easy. And I know seeing it for the first time, you're probably thinking, oh, that's really confusing. But once you start doing these problems and once you start to solve it, you're going to find that it's not all that bad. Okay? So let's take an example here. Let's say that we have an equation that looks like x squared plus 3x equals 8. All right? That's our equation. We want to find out where it crosses the x-axis. Now, I could complete the square. You know what? I think it's going to be hard to do that Well, not hard, but you've got, if you completed the square, you'd have 3 over 2, and you'd have to use fractions. Let's see how this formula might work. First of all, we're going to set the equation equal to 0 by subtracting 8 from each side. I've got x squared plus 3x minus 8 equals 0. All right? What is the a term here? 1. What is the b? And the c is? The c is negative 8. Not 8, negative 8. That's important. Okay? Now let's see how this works. In this equation, how do you memorize this equation? I'll tell you. Because you're going to have to memorize it. And if you're writing out this equation for every problem, by the time your homework is done, you'll have it memorized. Okay? So x is equal to, I want the opposite of b. So instead of 3, it's going to be negative 3. Plus or minus the square root of b squared. That is always going to be a positive number. Always. So b squared would be 9. Minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times 1, or just 2. Okay? Here's what my suggestion is. Go to your calculator and do what's under the square root first. And use parentheses like I have. So we have 9 minus 4, parentheses 1. Another parenthesis, negative 8, 41. We're not done yet. All I did was figured out what was inside the square root sign. And that is this. Plus or minus the square root of 41 all over 2. Use parentheses. Okay? So what are your zeros? Well, you have 2 of them. You have negative 3 plus the square root of 41, all divided by 2. And you have negative 3 minus the square root of 41, all divided by 2. In your calculator, I think a lot of you might make mistakes by not putting it into your calculator the right way. So here's what I would suggest. I would hit negative 3 plus square root of 41, and then hit enter, and then divide it by 2. So we would have 1.70. Let's say 1.70. Remember what I told you if you want to know? Well, let's just do this. Let's just put negative 3 minus the square root of 41. Hit enter, and then divide it by 2, and you get negative 4.70. Okay, and I'll do a couple more for these, so you guys get the hang of it. Are we okay so far? All right. The formula, opposite of b, plus or minus the square root, b squared minus 4ac, all over 2a. That's your formula. Okay, so let's take another example here. Yes, go ahead.
How do you know when to use this one and when to use the square?
We're going to get to that in just a minute. And that's a good question. How do you know? How do you know you don't factor? Yeah.
Where's the 2A come from?
You mean because A was equal to 1, and so 2 times 1 is 2? That's why it was just 2. All right, so let's try 2x squared minus 7 equals x. Here's a problem. The first thing you want to do is make this equation equal to 0. And so I'm going to subtract x from each side. And Kristen, that's called putting it in standard form, where you have ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, so I'm going to subtract x from each side. X minus x, I get 0. That's what you want to do. You want to set it equal to 0. And I have 2x squared minus x minus 7. I think it's real important for your next step to identify what your A, B, and C are. What is A? 2. What is your B? Negative 1. Not negative x, but negative 1. And then your C term is negative 7. Okay? So we go to your formula now. And to find x, it's equal to the opposite of b. All right, well, that's positive 1, isn't it? Plus or minus the square root of b squared. That first number is always positive. Minus 4 times a times c. All over 2a, or 2 times 2. Okay? Yeah.
So you have to do, like, when you have to square the b term, you have to do that before you set up the problem, like,
Yes.
okay.
But we should know. I think they're going to be small enough to where we'll be able to do
You
that.
can just write it in.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to do underneath the square root first. Trust me, it's going to make your work a lot easier. So it's going to be 1 minus 4, please use parentheses, times 2 times negative 7, and you're going to get 57 underneath the square root sign. So my answer is 1 plus or minus the square root of 57, all divided by 4. And if we want to get a couple of decimals, we would go 1 plus the square root of 57 divided by 4. And remember, we're going to do the top first, and then equals, and then divide by 4. That's one answer. And 1 minus the square root of 57 divided by 4. Okay? So if you do 1 plus the square root of 57, is that yours, Summer?
Yeah.
Hey. And then you divide that by 4, and you get 2.14. These are approximates. They're not exact, we've rounded. And then 1 minus the square root of 57 equals, and then divide that by 4, and you get negative 1.64. Okay? That's your 2 answers.
Are we gonna have fractions or no?
Well, not really.
Okay.
Now, let's answer Luke's question. The question was, how do you know what to use? I want you guys to turn to page 673. Turn to page 673. Come on.
Mr. Joseph, how did you get 50? Wait, no, never mind. I figured it out.
Okay?
Because that would equal, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry,
And the reason why I want you to use your calculator inside the square root is because it's not 1 minus 4, it's not negative 3.
Okay, yeah, I don't like it.
I know. Then, what you have to do is you have to do multiplication first, and then 1 plus your answer.
Okay.
So you have to do 4 times 2 is 8. Negative 4 times 2 is negative 8. Negative 8 times negative 7 is a positive 56. And then 1 plus 56.
And then, so that negative is just to get rid of. So once you get rid of that negative 4, because you multiply it to the 8, the 1 would be added to your answer.
Yeah.
Okay. That's right.
All right. Now, on page 673.
Hey, Scott.
On page 673, on top there, it says methods for solving quadratic equations. We have factoring, we have graphing, we have finding square roots, completing the square and quadratic formula. See example 4, and it says 10x squared minus 7 equals 0. What I would use, you have 10x squared minus 7 equals 0. Okay? Which one of the above methods would I use? Well, I would add 7 to both sides. And you're going to have all these tools to work with. And you have 10x squared equals 7. And then divide by 10. X squared equals 7/10. And so x would equal plus or minus the square root of 7/10. That's what I would do for that problem. So you want to pick the easiest problem. For letter B there, x squared plus 4x equals 0. Let's go to the next page here. I mean, we could complete the square. We could get it done. You know, or we could graph it. What I would use is factoring. Because now I see that, okay, x is equal to 0, or x is equal to negative 4. Okay? And how do you know? It's the more you do, the better you get with it.
Can you go back to the other problem?
Okay?
Holy.
But all of these that we're doing today are going to be what we just picked.
Yeah, let's just finish this out here. And then the last one, part C, where it says 5x squared plus 9x minus 4 equals 0, I would use quadratic formula. So you have all those methods to choose from. Okay, and you're going to have to tie it all together. Okay. So, for your homework for tonight, and what I would suggest, Sydney, because you asked that question, follow the directions. Okay? And you're going to see some of the ones are going to say, some of the directions say, solve the quadratic equation using any method. So you can use any one of the methods that you want. Okay?